Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we review the Warhammer 40k novel Shadowsun, The Patient Hunter by author Phil Kelly. As always with reviews, it'll be spoiler free, followed by a little spoiler focused discussion on one or two talking points I'd like to discuss at the end. But as always, let's begin by checking out the synopsis off the back of the book. Commander Oshasira, called Shadowsun by the elemental castes of the Tau, is known across the Chownuf expanse as an ice-cold military genius. She is the master of the stealth battlesuit assault and the Kauyon meta-strategy, that of the Patient Hunter. But how to lay a trap for the chaos-worshipping warriors of the Death Guard, whose ancient technology allows their fleet to rip holes in space, and how to deal with their demonic patrons, who defy the laws of physics and shatter the logical methods that Shadowsun holds so dear. With her forces spread far and wide on the dark side of the Great Rift, Shadowsun must respond to a surprise attack on the Startide Nexus wormhole portal. Worse yet, as hidden atrocities and treacheries are laid bare, the threat of civil war simmers between the Tau and their allies, the Kroot, the Nikasar, and the Karpaktin, with the damnable truths of the 41st millennium driving a lance through her armour of certainty. The Tau's finest commander will have to improvise, trust to instinct, and face the supernatural echoes of her race's own dark secrets, if she is to stand a chance of victory. Okay, so first of all, for this review I read the hardback edition. So if you listen to an audiobook version, I am most likely pronouncing many of those Tau names wrongly. This novel, as you may expect, follows the legendary Tau commander Shadowsun, as she desperately attempts to prevent a Death Guard fleet from entering the Startide Nexus wormhole, providing some insight into the battle and rivalry we saw spawned back during the Psychic Awakening campaign. Now, the Tau for me are a bit of an enigma. I've always enjoyed the premise of the greater good, the mystery of the power behind the Ethereals. However, as a faction, I've never quite fallen in love with them previously. But the more the faction's been appearing in stories over the recent years, the more and more I've found myself becoming intrigued by their future. And I'll say straight off, this story definitely provides more of the same in that regard. It always feels like a treat when we get a novel based on a major character, and particularly a character you've never spent too much time with before, which was the case for me with Shadowsun here. She has been in one or two stories I've read previously, mostly as the enemy to the Imperium faction focused on. But maybe because of that, I'd be hard pressed to say I truly know the character. And here with a Tau-centric novel, I was hoping to get an insight and grasp of the character I've yet to have. And I'm definitely pleased to say I think I've come out the other side of this with a much greater understanding of her. And that is solely down to one of this story's greatest strengths, in that it actually spends its time with the main character. I know that sounds obvious to some, but it's surprisingly not always the case. Sometimes you'll spend just as much time with a side character as you would the main one. And Shadowsun even takes a step further in this regard, with only a few forays off to a side story or alternative perspective. That is a blessing at the best of times, allowing you to bond with the main character and actually feel them develop. And even more so when you're immersed within a Xeno faction, which, no pun intended, is very much alien to the Imperium. It allows you to feel their culture, to get to grips with their terminology, motivations and characters, without getting pulled away to yet another character's perspective. It allows you to become immersed within the Tau Empire, which for me is really important. And here within Shadowsun, the author Phil Kelly allows that journey to become much easier. A very natural feeling progression. Now, talking of journeys, the Commander Shadowsun we find within this is very much a character caught up in her own personal journey of enlightenment, and not necessarily one she was prepared for or intended. As the summary surmises, and we have seen in stories over the recent years, there is a fair amount of turbulence bubbling within the borders of the Tau Empire, one very much beneath the surface. With its continued expansion out into the wider galaxy, the knowledge and reality of the galaxy becomes ever harder to contain, and it's something the guiding hand of the Ethereals need to contend with. Shadowsun is a loyal daughter of the greater good. She lives and breathes its philosophy. She is the embodiment of everything it means to be Tau. Yet here, through the events of this story, you see even this fanatical, loyal warrior faced with the consequences and actions the greater good can bring about. How the brutal treatment of their allies, hidden and denied by the ruling powers, can sow the seeds of doubt and suspicion within the most devoted. The simple fact is, for all the scorn the Tau throw in the Imperium's direction, they are equally as capable of brutal and callous acts. And it's this ongoing story thread that absolutely carries the novel for me. It treads a fine line as Shadowsun feels the desire to uncover exactly what's transpired, yet all the while has to contend with the very present and real threat of the Death Guard. The aspects of investigation, of uncovering a truth, the relationships of the various races within the Empire are the real highlight of this story. You feel like you're uncovering something very important. With every step that Shadowsun takes, you feel like you're delving deeper and deeper into the realities of the Empire. Something that affects more than just the events of this novel. And that's really heightened by having it be a character of importance, such as Commander Shadowsun, who is feeling the desire to uncover the truth, yet all the while remaining steadfast to the Tau ideal. Watching it all unravel behind the eyes of someone who truly doesn't want to believe the Empire could be capable of such atrocities. Now, there are of course other characters that Shadowsun meets along the way, the standouts for me being a Kroot by the name of Opik Tak, and the guiding ethereal known as Onla. For all the talk of the greater good, you just can't help but feel the hidden agenda behind the ethereals. But hey, maybe it's just my suspicious mind. I will also say the relationship Shadowsun has with her accompanying drones at times verges on the endearing. Not overdone, but something you could feel naturally progressing. And it definitely feels like this could be a fond relationship developed if her story continues, as they are essentially her only mainstay companions. A bit like Uriel Ventress and Pausanias used to be. The buddy cop relationship the Tau Empire never knew it needed. Now, although I've spoken of that investigation-esque narrative, there is just as much, if not more, action and war throughout. Everything revolves around the Death Guard's progress. The introduction of the Death Guard felt imposing. They felt threatening, dangerous, as you would hope the Death Guard Legion would. The main villain is a Death Guard Lord by the name of Lord Glurtosk, and he and his inner circle, when they were introduced, felt like they had the promise of being great villains. However, after their early appearances, they felt largely absent until far later in the story, which for me is a shame, because I very much enjoyed them from their screen time, or page time as it were. It's a delicate balance really, Sometimes it feels like you spend too much time with a villain point of view. However, here their introduction was so enjoyable for me, I wouldn't have minded seeing more of them. It wasn't overly done. Their appearances here were short and sweet, but they felt worthwhile. Each of Glurtosk's inner circle felt like they brought something different, and they worked well as a group. Now, as for the action itself, it was fun enough. It's always enjoyable watching the Tau reacting to chaos forces for the first time, when we the reader know exactly what each of these mysterious forces are. But it never really had me excited or anxious to see where it was all going to go next. I never really felt Shadowsun was in any danger no matter what the circumstances she was in, and so at times the battles did feel a little dragged out, particularly the earlier ones. And I will say on that, through the development of the story, by the time you reach the climactic action towards the end, I was much more invested in it. There's still that aura of invincibility for a major character that Shadowsun has, but the story had done a good job of bringing you on board with her cause. And there's some really interesting developments along the way, concerning the entire Tau Empire. I think having read this, it'll definitely have piqued anyone's interest into the future of this faction. And when you're portraying an established major character in a story, and can come out the other side with a clear growth in character development, all the while staying true to the character you know, you have to say that's a great piece of work by the author Phil Kelly, because that's exactly what he's achieved with Shadowsun here. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed Shadowsun the Patient Hunter. As a character, I feel I've come to understand her and her motivations better. I feel this story did a good job of giving a bit more depth to her character, especially moving forward. And really the same could be said for the Tau Empire in general. It continued establishing the underlying narratives that we've seen over the recent years, and adding those shades of grey to the holier-than-thou greater good. The events we see here could have far-reaching impact on the future of the faction entirely. I think my enjoyment could have probably been increased if the investigation and mystery aspect had been the more dominating narrative, and a little less time spent on the action, which was just a little too generic for me. I did find myself skimming a page or two in some parts to get back to the more story-driven narrative. If the action was going to be the dominant area, it would have been nice to see more of Lord Glurtosk and his corps. For the Tau, I really think a purely story-driven novel, focused on the ethereals and the heart of their empire, could redefine how we look at the Tau, and possibly really increase their popularity. Score-wise, I'll give it a 3 out of 5, a perfectly good and enjoyable read. Something that sets up Shadowsun's story to be continued, which I hope it will be, finding myself growing more attached and fond of the character at the end of her journey. It didn't reach levels of goosebumps anywhere, so I can't place it any higher. But this is one I definitely recommend giving a read, particularly if you want to see hints of what could be the future of the faction, or you simply want to get to know the Tau more from their perspective. But that's it for the spoiler-free review. Now just a little spoiler-focused discussion for those that have already read the book. So by far and away the biggest talking point of the book for me is the continued unravelling development of the emerging Tau god, or goddess to put it correctly. Here we saw the evidence of just what happened to the Death Guard fleet that entered the Nexus, halted and destroyed by the Tau goddess of the greater good. And we've even seen here Shadowsun interacting with her, the kernel of faith being instilled within perhaps the Tau Empire's greatest general. Honestly, this has me hugely excited for the future of the faction. Something we'll definitely have in-depth discussions on soon. It really does feel like this blossoming of faith amongst the Tau allies could cause huge problems for the Ethereals now, who want to deny this type of existence, and with Shadowsun, if not necessarily embracing it by the end, we've definitely seen her accepting it and allowing it amongst the allies. I don't know about anyone else, but I was definitely left with the vibes by the end that we could see Shadowsun becoming more and more encouraging of it in the future. And this definitely sets us up for good times ahead. I think we could very well continue to see more and more covered and clandestine extermination ordered by the Ethereals against the allies of the Tau Empire, the ones who are clearly now embracing faith. And hopefully we could even see Shadowsun slowly forced into opposition of that, perhaps ultimately leading to a reunion with a certain Farsight. I dunno, but again, I can't wait to see it. Hopefully we don't have to wait too long to see where it all goes. And that's really the only talking point I came away with from this novel. Really just eager to see where it's all going to go. Again, we're going to be discussing this in depth real soon, because it opens a lot of questions. But as always everyone, what do you think? Did you enjoy Shadowsun, and where do you think it is all going to go? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.